Hello everyone, today is Tuesday the 5th of September 2017. It is block height 483,722. Cypherpunks are libertarians who stopped whining. I love this quote and I've just retweeted it from my account so you can actually see it for yourselves. Philosophy for me has always been about taking a thought and bringing it into the public discourse. And some of the best philosophers I've ever met are not the famous ones you read about in the books. They're actually entrepreneurs. They're people that have a thought, are able to articulate it into words, but then they're able to bring it into action. Thoughts precede speech. They precede every act of your day. And many of the biggest calamities in history have been as a result of the failure of thinking. And so with that, I introduce my co-host today, Shinobi. Hello, how are you doing?
I'm doing all right. Gonna try and stop whining.
Yeah, stop whining and act. Theo Goodman.
Hey, what's up? I just want to make sure that we all stay reasonable.
Yeah, appeal to moderation is very important. Good job. And let's see if you can count how many logical fallacies we use in today's show as well. And maybe we'll get about another one of those Bitcoin bounties to whoever counts the most. You will have to use citation, though. You'll have to put little pointers in the description to the time codes. So let's go to our first story, which is, wait, they're doing it? So the BRIC nations are creating their own ICO. That's what I heard. Shinobi, is that true?
A country is doing an ICO, a bunch of countries. The world government is starting off with their own ICO right here. Breaking story on Block Digest.
But who's going to mine the blocks? Wait, the state's going to mine the blocks?
It's going to be an insta-mine, obviously. They're just going to mine everything and then give it out to who they want.
Right. But talk me through this. So this is going to be an old school cryptocurrency, not an ICO. I don't see any mention of Ethereum in here, for example, of them using like an ERC20 token. So this is going to be an old school cryptocurrency.
Yeah, this looks like it's mostly originating from Russia, which seems like it's because they've been pretty on the fence. I want to say for the past 2 years, there has consistently been both sides of the argument on how to deal with crypto voiced very vocally in their government. You have the side that wants to just ban it outright and try to get rid of it, and then a side that's very, very vocal about the necessity to adapt to it and incorporate it into their country so that they don't fall behind everybody else. And the head of the Russian Direct Investment Fund, Kirill Dmitriev, I think. Sorry if I butchered that to any Russians watching. But he wants to try and replace the dollar as the main means of international trade. Mm-hmm. And, this is kind of something,
well, that
everybody in the space.
That makes a lot of sense. Why do other countries have to use another country's currency in order to transact between one another?
Because we won World War II, duh.
And I heard the pound took a real beating after World War II, and the dollar became the de facto international currency, world reserve currency.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's something about oil. You have to buy it in dollars, and if you think about charging euros for your oil, like shit kicks off.
Yeah, I mean, but before we really dive back into the specifics of this, I kind of want to draw a nice analogy here. Is this entire space, cryptocurrency, Bitcoin, all of these systems are entirely voluntary. You are literally just buying into a meme that is enforced by software. Like the only reason it holds value is because people think it holds value, because they take it after thinking it holds value and actually put it to some use. Well, even the US dollar is absolutely no different in that regard. And seeing the way that America has projected itself with its foreign policy across the world over the past 60, 70 years since the end of World War II, a lot of other countries are not okay with the kind of head start we've been, as an American, I think, kind of underhandedly attempting to maintain through a lot of malicious and deceptive acts. And they're looking for alternatives. They're deciding that maybe the meme of the US dollar isn't as unbreakable as they once thought it was.
So Dmitriev discusses here that it was brought up. This is not a fake news story, okay? I want to make that clear. Like at first, when you showed this to me, I was like, oh, fake news. It's just a press release that's been put out. But this is actually a direct link after a summit. And so it doesn't, to me, look like PR, like a lot of these stories just happen to be. Because actually, I want to draw people's attention to further down. Actually, how is Ethereum spelled there? Before we go any forward.
What is that, MSNBC or CNBC?
I don't know. That's not how you spell Ethereum, right? That's but one of the interesting things is that like Russia is already taking its own steps towards developing a cryptocurrency, and they're basically saying that they're not going to use their own technology. They're not going to use foreign technology. Is that right?
Their own math, even.
Yeah,
their own cryptography.
Yeah.
Math works differently in Russia, I guess.
Yeah, that's so weird. I don't know. It's like Russia has its. Yeah, here's the quote. Russia has its own cryptography school. I think that because originally I read Russia has its own cryptography, and I was like, wow, that's amazing. I think they were absolutely capable of creating a cryptographic unit, a tool based on the blockchain technology. Oh, they even used the word blockchain right. Janine, you must be delighted they didn't use it as an abstract noun. And work out concrete, like we're just going to make blockchain. Blockchain is going to cure all our problems. We've got a blockchain strategy. And they said they're going to work out concrete regulations to set the framework for operations. So I love the universality of this vision that, this entity called Satoshi Nakamoto originally had is so pervasive. Like a spirit, it just kind of, walks through walls, it crosses borders and enters into the minds of other state actors who actually don't like other states. And this, I didn't define, for you philosophers out there, I didn't define what I meant by entrepreneur earlier. For me, the definition of an entrepreneur is someone that has the ability to anticipate demand. And if you are able to accurately bring what the environment can afford, in terms of like what the laws of physics can give you, and match that up with the demands of a consumer, let's say, then you have something worthwhile. And I think if these state actors think that they've been able to do that, they've been able to take an affordance from the environment, this software, this open source code that anyone can use, and bring that to the demand that they see that their customers, their consumers are their citizens or their subjects, and actually give them something so that they're able to operate, they're able to transmit value to each other without having to use the US. Because at the moment, a lot of people don't realize that all US wire transfers internationally have to go via the homeland, right? If you want to send a transmission from Russia to China in US dollars, it has to, through US banking, you have to go through the US banks. You can't just send it direct. And that was something that came out recently since the financial crisis, I understand. So I find it, I actually, even though I don't think of myself as a statist, I'm not a big fan of government, I do like the fact that I find it validating that governments are now thinking that they can use this to transmit value around the world, even if they don't choose Bitcoin.
Yeah, I think that they need to stay. That's definitely part of it, about transmitting value maybe and all that. But a lot of it is also, as with other things, about remaining relevant.
Right.
Other people, exactly. They have to remain relevant, and they have to remain relevant for the people too. Because if people hear about, oh yeah, Bitcoin and all this stuff, and we don't have much, or we're behind, or they at least need to have the perception that, something is going on with it, and the government is here to help me with that, and they're providing a solution for it. So I don't have to use the dangerous, illegal, or part illegal Bitcoin. And I heard that you get hacked. I can just use government coin or whatever. And hey, if at the same time it potential way to really transfer value without having to use the U.S. banks or any other, or actually any other embargo or whatever else comes up. You know what I mean? Even though it's not, it's a centralized currency, it still could be used if someone else would accept it, to transfer, you know, if enough people accept it to transfer value. So maybe that will have a real utility. But I think at this point, it's just the perception thing. And, you know, they're doing it. If someone else is doing it, then they've got to do it and I've got to do it. And it doesn't matter in the first case if it has real utility, actually. It matters that I'm in competition with other countries, blocks of companies, blocks of countries. And if it turns out that this thing really is useful, then we need to be ready for it. And that's what you have with the blockchain, whatever the hell kind of stuff. So what you have with the ICOs, in some cases, I think, because if someone in your industry or your sub-genre industry, that's a competitor of you, does an ICO and raises millions, and now they have bigger guns than you.
I like this idea that countries are just blocks of companies. Did you come up with that?
Well, it's true.
I just came up with it as freestyle. It just kind of came out. But that's but that's kind of how it works out in the end. You know what I mean? I mean, they have to. Okay, the government has to show the companies that they are doing enough. They're in constant competition with other countries, because I could just move my company. Of course, there's some friction to that. It's not just as easy as, you know, moving a chair in the room or something. But theoretically, I could just move, depending, as long as it's not an oil company and so on. But a lot of the time, I can just move my company to another country that's more appealing. So if they're offering me, you know, something in return, I don't know, safety, taxes, whatever, you know, or they have cool new blockchain function coin thing where I don't have to deal with US banks, or they're at least telling me that, well, then maybe I'll stay around for a few more years and see how that works out. So that could be part of it.
I think,
yeah, that's a really interesting breakdown on a macroeconomic scale, because that really is, like, you have these countries that they manage their currencies, obviously, but as far as actually moving that currency around and creating value, it's the companies, unless you're talking a socialist entity like China or Venezuela, that is really driving that economy's gears. And they really are. Like, it's not like all of them get together at the table meeting and plot their conspiracies to take over the world, but they are kind of loosely guiding the direction that a country's economy is going in. And I mean, real quickly, before we move on to the power subsidies, Chris, I wanted to touch on the two ways that they were talking about architecting this BRICS currency. One was pretty much moving some national currencies like the Brazil, the Chinese renminbi, the ruble over to gold backing, and attempting to use that as a pricing mechanism to be able to actually interact with each other. But the other one was considering moving to the special drawing rights model that the International Monetary Fund actually tried back in the 70s. And essentially what they did was they issued a number of credits, I guess you would call them, and then backed that with a basket of currencies in the major currencies of the world, pretty much. And you would be able to use this, like you would trade in your special drawing rights and be able to get currency out, but you had the obligation to pretty much buy back your special drawing rights at a certain point. So it worked like a credit system. But then we had the gold standard collapse. It really didn't function too well after you had everything free floating, and ultimately the basket of currency it was backed by and the ultimate supply is so insignificantly small, there's really no liquidity to use that widely as an organizational system. So I mean, they're very much thinking of using something besides Bitcoin, but they're still kind of scrambling as to how to set up pools of liquidity and actually develop a pricing mechanism that isn't as chaotic as just using something like Bitcoin.
Mm-hmm. And obviously, to touch on Theo's point as well, and on to our next story, is that clearly there is some value to it, because there is, states have recognized that mining is a thing. And we know that the Chinese government is profiting indirectly off of Bitcoin mining at the very least because of, the taxes and the links to, hydro energy power sources and creating an immediate demand for that up front so that costs can be paid down and so forth. What do you make of this story here? I think you suggested these ones, right?
Yeah, I mean, this is like pretty interesting because one of the things they talk about, I forget if it was this article or the previous one, but Russia is considering actually legalizing ICOs in direct contrast to what pretty much every other country is doing. And they're doing this to fund mining operations. So essentially have like a revenue sharing scheme to get a percentage of revenue out of mining operations in Russia. And a lot of the power companies in Russia are starting to look around for miners and make direct deals to sell surplus power, because Russia actually has, I think it was a few gigawatts of extra power output. And it's like when you have a surplus power on a power grid, like that's a problem that a lot of countries deal with. If you can't find a place for that power to go, well, the generator, whatever you're using to generate it, it's still churning it out. So you're effectively just wasting electricity. And with such a huge surplus, and especially being a country sitting on a lot of oil reserves, that could actually allow them to get very competitive with China. Even though China is very big, it's one of the biggest countries in the world right now in terms of investing into renewable energy sources. So even considering a lot of China's miners get their power from hydroelectric dams or other renewable sources, this would allow Russia to get very competitive with that. And like, this is, again, like calling back to them wanting to find an alternative for Bitcoin to use for international settlements. Well, why are they talking about creating an alternative while making big moves to essentially subsidize miners for pre-existing cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin or Ethereum to move to Russia? It's like they're hedging their bets here. They're trying to find a way to build something that they can have a control or a stake in, but at the same time, they're trying to get their stake secured in the public system. Mm-hmm. Because if they fuck up and can't pull off their own private system, that's what it's going to be.
That's an interesting point. So they're building a reserve, basically front loading up on a reserve.
Yeah, exactly.
Theo?
That makes sense as a way to look at it as far as building up reserve. And I think that's what we've already seen some discussion about, countries or companies holding some Bitcoin in reserve, or, I mean, here we have it as, as a mining function. How are you going to pay you're a big company or a country and, someone clicks something wrong in an email and your whole system is messed up? How are you going to pay that off? Ransomware, well, you're going to need Bitcoin. Mm-hmm. What is going to be accepted to pay anything international where they don't want US dollars and it's all internet based? Well, it might be Bitcoin that you need to have in your reserve. You don't want to be scrambling in an emergency situation to get some Bitcoin. And if it does seem like they might be hedging the thing. I think it's interesting. And yeah, maybe they're going to try to compete for miners. Like, okay, China has a bunch of miners because of some of the electricity costs and the way things are set up. Well, maybe Russia says, okay, we want to do it too. And we want to have our own mining cabal over here in Russia.
Yeah, and it's like yeah, and exactly, perfect timing, Chris. Perfect timing.
But presumably not in apartment buildings, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, and that picture, of course, is probably not going to be one, or it could be one in an apartment building if the people are trying to use free or cheap electricity. But, it is a fire risk, and it is really dangerous when people don't know what they're doing, and they have, you know, what if I go on whatever eBay or whatever secondhand internet place and buy some bunch of old miners, 1 or 2 years old, plug them all in. They're all in different condition. They've been used by different people. I have no idea if one of them has a short circuit. I just plug them all in. I get it going somewhere, and that's the end. You know, it just takes one little spark with all those fans.
Right, but
could have a bad situation. Yeah, sure.
Is this just a fake news article? Because at the end of it, it's like, it's basically acknowledging that officials in the region of this region I can't pronounce in Russia told RT they're not afraid of Bitcoin miners, as computer systems used to create digital tokens use far less energy than, say, for example, electric heaters.
I don't know. Maybe they just need some clicks. Well, they need clicks. Maybe you just generate. Maybe it's a title generator. You mix in. Okay, we got Russia, Bitcoin mining. I mean, that's already. I mean, if you put Trump in there, then you've hit everything. You know, so you know, North Korea, Trump, Russia, Bitcoin. Then you've already hit a lot of people. Are gonna, so that could be fake news. Who knows?
But I mean, it kind of fits into like a lot of the things we covered in an earlier episode on how they're attempting to regulate cryptocurrencies in general. That like they're pretty much recognizing it as a currency, but regulating and taxing it as a commodity, so that they can apply all the types of restrictions on who's allowed to trade it. You know, you have to be a licensed trader, a competent trader, like go through all the red tape. And they're pretty much they're trying to integrate it into their country, but they're trying to lock out all the normal people. They're trying to keep it isolated to the oligarchical elite on the top, so that they maintain that mafia-like control of most of the important aspects of that society. That's pretty much been how Russia has ran since the Soviet Union collapsed. And I think that this kind of, it very interestingly fits into that, because it is a legitimate concern in a way. Like mining, especially, you have people who don't know what they're doing, they're not experienced with electrical wiring or rigging up systems like that. It is a very big fire hazard. But that's also a very convenient excuse while they're attempting to subsidize and establish these larger mining operations to, once again, like they are with access to exchanges or the ability to purchase it, cut out the normal person. It fits very well with this struggle that's been going on in Russia the past 2 years. Like you have the faction that wants it and the faction that doesn't. And how do you reconcile that? Well, you only let certain people have it.
Yeah, states are all about the control of definitions. They control how things are defined. And what I love about Bitcoin is that it's so evasive. It resists definition. You can't put it succinctly, you know, in a nice, neat paragraph of like, you know, some statute or some law that you want to get drafted, because it kind of falls under property and it falls under money and it falls like it acts a bit like a share, and it has all these various facets to it. And so the states find it very, very difficult to really pin it down. And I enjoy that. And they can't just force, you know, definitions on people, because ultimately physics will slap them in the face and go, no, that's wrong. Especially when you're coding, where you'll basically have an interface and a language that allows you to interface with the physics of reality, when you can actually, you know, put language into a computer and tell that CPU and the gates on that CPU and that RAM how to operate under certain conditions. It's very, very powerful, and it becomes a form of speech. And now you know, as a developer, you can export your intentionality across space and time. You can put an idea or a vision that you have into a block of code that can instruct how hardware should behave at a distance from yourself. And that puts you in an incredible advantage, and it gives you the similar properties that a state used to have. And a state can't really do much about that. I mean, they can scare people, I guess, with violence and the threat of violence and sticking people in cages. But let's talk about Venezuela. Let's talk about another state. This is like a BRIC Nation special, but we need to add a V in there for Venezuela to make it work. Well, Why is it so dangerous to mine Bitcoins in Venezuela?
Just the level of political corruption, since they're, I mean, like you can see here, this is their currency since things started going bad in the oil markets. And yeah, that's 90 something percent of the value of the bolivar just gone. And it's evaporating even as we speak. So you have people earning money that is lost a significant chunk of its purchasing power by the time they collect it and go to buy what they need to take care of their families. And see, like the interesting thing is, like I know there's been a lot of headlines about like Bitcoin mining being declared illegal floating around, especially in the West, but CNBC and some of the people they were interviewing from Venezuela, actually it's saying it's not illegal. And most of these mining operations that are being shut down and the people being arrested for it actually aren't being arrested and charged with mining Bitcoin. They're being charged with things like stealing electricity or having a hazardous setup. Like one person was literally arrested because his mining operation, they claimed, was threatening the electrical grid stability in their entire area with some of the power shortages they've been dealing with. And some people have been charged with literally terrorism. It's like they're finding all of these little indirect ways to go after these people that aren't just explicitly declaring mining illegal. And this is the worst case I could imagine as far as a state reacting to Bitcoin. They are just scrambling. They are helpless. Their economy is spinning out of control. Their economic policy is spinning out of control. I mean, last year they could not even afford to, because most of the currencies in the world, they actually outsource to specific contracting firms to print their physical currency notes. They could not afford to get bills printed to be able to keep up with the level of money they were having to print. Like they could not have, they were printing money, but they could not afford to actually pay for the physical notes to represent the money they were printing. And they're just scrambling. Anything that is threatening their currency controls, anything that is threatening the perception of the bolivar as a currency, any source of revenue. Like I've even heard stories from people where the cops don't even arrest you. They just steal your mining equipment and then go set it up themselves. It's just like it's a complex organism tearing itself apart just at the mere thought of something like Bitcoin undermining that fist of control they have locked down.
Yeah, and these pictures actually look like real pictures. These are not stock library photos in this CNBC article that we've got here. These are genuine pictures, and it looks like they're mining Ethereum. They're not actually mining Bitcoin per se, right? They're mining Ethereum.
Yeah, they're mining a lot of cryptocurrencies. I mean, one of the persons in the interview they gave, I believe it was the gentleman on the screen there before you switched off. I forget his name, but he actually said Bitcoin is one of the riskier things to mine. And his figure, I believe, was a single Ethereum mining rig was actually enough to be able to feed like your family. And I mean, this is like one of the most interesting things to me. Like I'm personally, I guess you could call me a Bitcoin maximalist. I think most of the alternative projects in this space are either scams or just flawed ideas. But people in a situation like a lot of the people in Venezuela, they don't care. They don't care about the viability of the project, what it's for, how it's managing its externalities, is it scalable? They just don't give a shit. Is this going to give me money so that I can put food on my children's plate? Mm-hmm. And they're literally scrambling for any of these systems anywhere that offer them that kind of income. And like a lot of people have always boo-hooed and like to shoot down the notion that Bitcoin is going to help people in places like Africa or South America or in these developing countries because the fees are too big. Somebody who makes $2 a day, how are they going to be able to use Bitcoin if a fee is $2? They don't care. They're not using it to go buy their coffee at Starbucks. They're putting their money someplace where it's not going to lose 100% of its value like over the course of a year. Where your dollar is going to have the purchasing power of a penny at the end of the year. They're looking like it's a MacGyver slapstick economy that they're using. to actually provide for themselves. It's not just, okay, we've imported the first world financial services, yay, life is better. It's a struggle to actually survive and put food on the table. And these costs that a person in the first world likes to indignantly say is too high for them, they don't care. If it can help them take care of their family, they're going to use it.
Yeah, I like the cultural reference to MacGyver as well. For those of you who weren't around in the 80s and 90s, it was a really good TV show about a guy who could like build anything out of like gaffer tape and elastic bands and anything, really. He was very good. He improvised. He was a really good improviser, and he knew how shit worked. Yeah, I think a lot of the challenges that we're facing right now are challenges of language and discourse. I feel like, you know, when you meet someone and they're super, super smart, and they're so smart that it makes you feel nervous, and maybe that you say something and you think, oh God, that was really stupid, and you're more self-conscious. I try to think of everyone I meet as being like that, to sort of try and keep myself in check and a little bit honest. I like those people. When someone criticizes me, I try to, as much as I can, I'm only human, obviously, I try to lean into it, right? I try to lean into the criticism and lean into the fear, because I know that in the long run, that's going to make me stronger. It's going to make me a better intellectual. It's going to make me smarter about myself. And I feel like if everyone had to, you know, felt like when they approached a really smart person, if they felt like everyone was like that, there would be a lot of silence right now. There wouldn't be so much shouting and barking your opinions and all of this kind of thing, or trying to force other people just to believe what you believe. I feel like everyone would just be sat back in their seat like, shit, don't say anything unless you've got a really good argument. And what I like about coding and IT, I mean, I'm more of an IT sysadmin person than a developer, but, you know, I do dabble, is that you're thinking at the resolution of the whole system, and you're thinking of a system that is self-regulating, i.e. a system that doesn't need you. You're trying to engineer yourself out of existence, right? Because you don't want to go back and fix the bugs. The problems with regulators is that they kind of need to stay in a job. So when they come up with the rules, they're not writing, you know, this is how you respond to the unique situation in the unique way. They're writing the rules in the sense of like, this is just how you respond in a general way to a general situation. And you're going to need someone like me to fix it if the language isn't quite right. If we fudge this to get a bill through Congress, or we kind of like, you know, the sausage was made and it was really ugly and we just kind of did it to get it through Parliament. Like, I don't feel like, I think a lot of people right now are working towards the goal of like, let's run. Like, if you can't get elected, then your idea is bogus. And the underlying assumption is that the traditional legacy system is the right system and that we should all aspire to that. And actually, I think that's everything that's really wrong with it. And countries like Venezuela are just a perfect example of how you can be born into a country like the UK or the US and you think, well, statism is great. Well, it's working for me, right? Like, you know, I get my child tax credits, I get the NHS if I'm in England, free health service. But if you lose that lottery of life and you're born under a state that isn't so good, a state doesn't look so much like a, you know, a cell phone provider, because at least then you can choose which provider. This time you're like born into it, and like the provider you've been handed is like the one you've got to live with for the rest of your life. And I feel, you know, Bitcoin is opt-in and it's voluntary, and that's kind of what drew me to it. But it's always a philosophy that is action orientated rather than just words. And I think Bitcoin has done a great job at exposing all the frauds and the wannabes and the people, the pretenders, the people that wish they were, you know, more. And the only thing that they can do in a fit of impotent rage is just like, here's what I think. And this is my view. This is my opinion. But I think the people that are going to be remembered are the people that are like, you know, this gentleman here, David Lopez, that you mentioned, and they're actually doing stuff. And I think it's wonderful that, like, even though we do kind of take a Bitcoin maximalist bend on this channel, like we can't deny the existence of the altcoins, and they do exist, and they do act as a way of lowering the barrier to entry to a lot of people that otherwise wouldn't have access to this market, because the coin's cheaper and the mining is easier. So I had a little ranties there.
Yeah, I mean, you're right on point, Chris. Like the quote you started the show with was perfect. Bitcoin is libertarians who quit whining. They built something. Like the notion that is so prevalent in Western society that you have merit if you convince people you do is just so fundamentally flawed. You have merit if you provide something, you build something, you can help people do those things that provides them value or a service or something that can help them. It's not just about making somebody think you can help them. It's about actually helping them.
Yeah. Yeah, very few politicians ever do that because the incentives are for them to kick all blame all the problems they have on the last guy and kick every problem they create down to the next guy, right? So that you just sit there in the middle like, hey, what up? I'm just like releasing leaks from my cabinet office to get back at my political rivals that are actually inside my own, party. And I'm just going to like chill out and do some press releases and go on camera and say some sound bites and not answer any questions. And yeah, like all that stuff. And before you like will come at me like, oh, you anarchist idealist, like anarchy is like untenable. Anarchy is the default state of the world, my friend. Like it exists in the boundaries, like between the lines that men draw on bits of paper. And remember that the map is made of the same particles as the world that it represents. Those people that rule you, they are living in anarchy. Like, because between them, it's like a club of kings. They're all like showing up at their summits like, yeah, what up? We got it. We made it. But they force statism on everybody else. We all have to kind of live in this kind of place where we feel free to move because we have like physical space. But that's not, you don't realize the lack of freedom that you really have until you try to move in ways that you didn't think were possible and that were unanticipated. Just like Satoshi Nakamoto, who if his real identity was ever known, would almost certainly have been prevented from creating Bitcoin. He was moving in a way, he was doing something that he was not free to do, not really. And if you think you're free, it might just be because you're doing what you're supposed to do. And to quote your Hydra on Twitter, you're resonating at the designating frequency, right? You're doing like what the government expects of you. So after that rant, I don't know if there are any comments before we go to our last story. And James Wan is saying he only loves me. I don't know.
I think I'll have a joke to tell at the end after we get to that.
You can tell the joke now.
No, man, I'm going to leave everybody in suspense.
Oh, okay. All right. Let's go to the chat room before we go to the last story of the day. And got my fans in here. I'm not a big fan of the fan. Stands for fanatic. I like friends. How about friends that I haven't met yet? Friends on the internet.
As long as they're reasonable. We have to be reasonable. And we have to have systems that are we have to have things, we can't try to think that we can have all the freedom in the world. We have to have, reasonable systems, and only so many people can fit into the state of New Hampshire. So, because of that, we have to think of reasonable things to do. So, just keep that in mind.
Well, I thought the liquor licensing laws in New Hampshire were terrible. Like you had to go in like a state-run liquor license, the state-run liquor store or whatever.
Well, yeah, that's example of state force, and that's not reasonable. So
a lot of the people that I've met that call themselves, libertarians, in my experience, just personally, they actually just want to be the people in charge. Like, that's it. Like, it really boils down to the fact that they've got this idea and this vision, like most people, whether you're on the left or the right, really, it's just the same, the same wings of, of the same dead old bird. And it's just like, yeah, well, I believe this. And if I was in charge, this is how I do things. Stop trying to be in charge. Like, I am very, very suspicious of people that want to have power and want fame and want money. Like, it's one thing to be successful, and that's great. Like, you should definitely do that. But like, when you start seeking power, I get very suspicious very quickly. And it's very easy for us to sit back in our armchairs and say, well, this is how I think the world should be. But I think a bit of humility you know, would go a long way. I want to hear a joke. Someone tell me a joke.
Okay, here it is, everybody. The suspense is over. Your government utilizes your tax dollars efficiently.
Is that true? Like, would you strongly agree, disagree, or strongly disagree? To put your answers in the chat. How well do they spend that money they took off you? And don't say that they don't threaten to stick you in a cage, because you know what will happen if you keep refusing to pay it. They do. It's usually, like in the UK, it's like 6 months if you keep refusing to pay it. And there are people that have been sent to prison for, you know, just like refusing to pay tax, like on principle. And they take it to the last appeal, and then the judge is like, well, I haven't got a choice, mate. You know, you're breaking the law. You're going down. Depends how much you take.
There's an argument in the U.S. that could be made, I guess, that the income tax is actually not constitutional. And something a lot of the lower courts have been doing, which is, again, unconstitutional, is refusing to even let people push those cases beyond, like, the circuit courts. Like, they will essentially go, no, like, you cannot go to the higher courts, which is exactly how our court system is supposed to be structured, and are completely undermining the entire system in that way. They're just
but who's going to build the roads, though? And no, I'm not saying that. I don't want hospitals, and I don't want roads, and I don't want infrastructure. That's not what I'm saying. Don't misrepresent the argument. It's not that we don't. It's really a debate over who can, like, how that money is gathered, who controls it. Does it have to be in this centralized entity, or could it be a little bit more decentralized? Like, real power is local. And I think that we're now developing tools through this technology, albeit very nascent, I think, at this stage. It's hard to anticipate right now how these tools are going to develop over time. But I think we're developing tools for autonomy. And, you know, I'm trying, I hope, in my short career in Bitcoin so far, to try and create a culture of, you know, confident and independent thinkers. And that's sort of how I want, you know, how I like my friends to be, and to challenge me as well. So, yeah. Shall we move on? Shall we promote Flibbr's campaign right now that he's got going?
Yes.
Status Fudders, yeah.
Status Fudders. But one person that I don't know to be a statist is Flibbr. He's over on our sister channel on Whalepool, at Whalepool on Twitter if you want to check it out. And he's challenging people that have been spreading FUD about USD Tether to come on and speak to him in the chat. Apparently he did have you know, quite a lively debate, so I'm led to believe, with somebody that's on this video right now, and Zane, formerly at Bitfinex, and he wants to take you on. So a lot of people have been saying that Tether isn't backed by real dollars, or it's insolvent, and today Tether actually put out an update where they enumerated, you know, itemized all the current issues with the banking and the path forward. They're talking about releasing other tokens that are actually going to be backed by other currencies like the Japanese yen and the British pound. Also future rollout plans of on, you know, actually having the protocol on Ethereum and maybe Litecoin as well. They've also got a Trezor app in the works and so forth. But really the aim is not to shill Tether here. I don't actually work for Tether, by the way. Bitfinex is a separate thing, but to really just say I like what Flibbr's trying to do here, because the people that have been spreading FUD and misinformation in this industry, they don't like accountability. And it's one thing to be anonymous, and there is somebody on this video who likes to be anonymous, and that anonymity can breed authenticity, because it allows you to break away from the person you've always been and the person that maybe society told you were, and you can go on the internet and put on a mask and be the person you want to be. And it certainly allows you to criticize big, powerful companies. But if you've just been doing it over and over again, and the trolling isn't artistic, it's not funny, it doesn't help you express an idea in an unconventional way, it starts to just become targeted harassment. Like,
and most importantly, like, if you have an accusation, you put it to the person you are accusing. You do not just run around. I mean, yes, of course, like, that's not to say don't make accusations publicly, but you address them to the person you're accusing of something. You don't slink around and spread rumors behind somebody's back like a coward.
Exactly.
You bring it to their face.
Courage, originality, authenticity, all of these themes kind of thread in. And so I like what Flibbr's doing, and I will definitely be promoting his efforts, because I think that a lot of what these fudders have been hiding behind is this mask of anonymity and lack of accountability. And it's one thing to raise a few criticisms, and that's fine. But like when it's just relentless, and then you're like, when you're actually proved wrong, you're reaching, so you're creating conspiracy theories, and then you're reaching for more extreme things. Then I think you just got to get your ass over onto TeamSpeak and get on the mic and just tell everyone, like tell the world, you know, and put your voice out there.
This is their chance. If you want to critique a company, then this is, or whatever, then this is an invitation for you to man up and do it. And then you have the spotlight. And if you really do have, you know, evidence or a good argument, etc., like you say, then this is a good chance for you to do it. So
yeah.
Yeah,
and conversely, yeah, that's right. And conversely, like I said earlier, like for those being criticized, lean into that criticism. Don't resist it. Don't, like, you know, block people that say things that maybe, you know, rub you up the wrong way or make you feel uncomfortable. Like, ask them more. Like, ask them to tell you, go into more detail. Like, you know, and keep doing that until, you know, it really hardens the spirit. And I think, you know, leads to a better strength of character. So on that note, any final thoughts before we say goodbye?
Yeah, I just kind of wanted to address a question, Max Kaiser. Are you the real Max Kaiser?
No, he's not. He does want to sell the handle to the real Max Kaiser, though. Did you launch Startcoin? Like, do you want something called Startcoin, Max? Did you? Is that say right? How is Startcoin doing?
Yes, but just to answer your question though, Max, that's a legitimate concern. You know, Tether is something that is backed by fiat in a bank account. Yes, that backing could be seized, and you know that's an open risk. That's not hidden from anybody. That is when you take possession of Tether, you know that's how the system is architected. It is not trying to be a completely uncensorable layer on Bitcoin's blockchain. It's simply something to take a little bit of the friction of moving fiat around. And by the same token, what happens if a government steps in and just seizes the crypto holdings of an exchange? I mean, absolutely anything in this space that has a custodial element to it comes with that risk. And it's not just something that's like exclusive to Tether.
I think people sometimes like to draw historical comparisons and say, look, this doesn't work in principle because it didn't work back then in some other time period. And the problem with that is that you're assuming that these universalities are atemporal. And that is that things can't change, that technologies can't change, that we can't move on in our understanding, and things can actually be different now because of social dynamic changes, for example, or technological improvements. Things that we cannot anticipate right now can happen in the future that can end up, you know, being a solution to today's problems. But rest assured, one thing that I have known to be true is that for every solution, there ends up being more problems. So we'll probably just end up replacing the old problems with new ones. So not to be too pessimistic on the end of this, at the end of this show. If you want some optimism, do be sure to join in for tomorrow's show. Theo, do you have any final thoughts?
Oh, I just want everyone to be reasonable, and yeah, I'm actually surprised about. I like that about the you know, as it once was, it will always be mentality, and you know and I'm really surprised the 3-letter word hasn't been brought up or that much. Said Gox, because that's the normal thing. Because that's what happens. People are like, or what exchange, could be any exchange. My withdrawal is delayed. Gox. Spoofy is there. Gox.
Spoofy.
That's from Gox too, because of the Gox spoofy, whatever they called it.
The Willy bot.
The Willy bot. Yeah, that's the Willy, right? So you know, the spoofy is the new Willy of the GOX. So in crypto, you always have a GOX, and then you can always blame that into like the mysterious masked Chinese man behind your computer that's judging all your trades or something like that. I don't know what the GOX is, kind of like the boogeyman of crypto. And a lot of these things it's like you said, the critique is fine, but when it just gets to like 20 million tethers were made, that's the reason for the Bitcoin pump, it's another GOX waiting to happen, withdraw now, everybody, it's just getting, you know, ridiculous.
Yeah, if you make enough accusations, eventually you're hoping, like, if I just throw enough shit at the wall, something will bound to stick. So eventually, if I just keep saying it over and over again. All right.
Right. If you say GOX 3 times a day, then you're safe.
Yeah. Okay.
Shall
we stop just giving people our opinions and like go and do some coding? I actually, to my shame, did set up a Bitcoin Cash node today. I had to for my work, but I will shut it down as soon as I'm done with it. It's in no way an endorsement of Bitcoin Cash, but I did have a lot of fun, like spinning up the node and seeing how efficient it was. And I was ready to give the credit to Roger Ver until I realized, no, wait, this is all the work of like Bitcoin Core. What am I talking about? If you like today's show, you can hit the like button and the subscribe. But remember, only if you want to. See you tomorrow. Bye for now.